Commissioner of the Big Sky Conference, and like to welcome you to our eighth, as Janie told me, our eighth Health and Wellness Symposium. We've tackled a number of topics in various forms at each of our campuses. The way we do our meetings, just so you understand kind of why we're here, is we obviously hold meetings 2 or 3 times a year for all our administrators. And our spring meeting, we rotate around to our campuses. So we've always done this symposium when we come to a campus, and we've tackled a number of different issues. And some of those I'll talk about here. We've talked about mental health, and we've had speakers kind of talking about student athletes and how we can address and help them with mental health issues. We've talked about diversity and inclusion, and an increasingly important part of how we govern our universities and our athletic departments. We've tackled things like sleep health, how to be a bystander training and sexual assault issues on campus. And most recently, we had Tim Elmore come to Greeley, Colorado last year talking about the current group of college students we see coming in and their differences of how they were raised and what they've been exposed to in their lives previous to coming to university. That's different than many of the current students we have on campus. So that was really good. We're really excited about today, and thank you to President Green and to Terry and our great hosts here at the University of Idaho. It's great to be here in Moscow and to be part of this wonderful campus on this beautiful day. And so with that, I just want to say thank you very much for your attendance and introduce the athletic director here at the University of Idaho, Terry Gawlik. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, for that introduction and the education on what we do as part of our conference moving forward. Appreciate your leadership. Welcome to our lovely auditorium. I want to thank our panelists here today and our facilitator, Kalani, who is a track athlete for us. They're going to be sharing their insight on the tragic situation that occurred on our campus last November. There are many challenges we face as leaders in higher education, but nothing can compare to what we went through together as a campus community last year. Our president and team, several represented here up on the stage, or they'll be called up on the stage today, acted swiftly and navigated the situation with compassion and grace. I am hopeful everyone here will be able to gain insight on how committed our campus leaders and students are to one another. It is my hope that you leave today with some understanding of the many challenges and difficult decisions that had to be made. I'm so proud to be a member of this community. Vandal strong. With that, I would now like to bring up Executive Vice Provost for Student Affairs and Dean of Students, Dr. Blaine Eccles.
Well, good afternoon. Terry, thank you for that very warm, emotional introduction. We do want to make sure that we're engaging in a conversation and providing you information that is going to help you out in your campuses should you ever face a crisis. I pray, quite frankly, that no one ever has to experience what we've gone through, but I would echo Terry that I'm incredibly proud to work at this institution, incredibly proud of the people that I was able to work with navigating through this time. And most of all, I think I'm most proud of our students and how they navigated through it. What I plan on doing is walking you all through a brief presentation on the time frame from the day of the horrific murders up to the present time. And I would encourage you to take notes if you have questions along those way, and our wonderful student moderator, Keelani Hardaway, is going to help facilitate that with a panel here in a moment. But if you'll bear with me for a few minutes, I'm going to walk you through the time frame, and then that helps put us all on the same page with some information. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly because there's clearly a lot that happened over the last 6.5 months, but we'll kind of go forward from there. To begin with, I always like to remind folks of where we are. Moscow is a small town, and we get often confused with the larger Moscow across the world. But when you look at the Pacific Northwest, Moscow is a rural regional school. And while we are the land-grant institution for the state of Idaho, the majority of our individuals that come here are from outside of our community. So it's pretty small, pretty rural and land-grant from that aspect of it. We're less than 7 miles away from another land-grant institution, Washington State University. And so that's an important notice for what's happened, just given the impact that what happened here clearly, obviously, had an impact on their campus as well. And I'll let them share that story when they're ready to tell it from that standpoint. Campus of Moscow, we love this institution. It is, I think, I'm biased, the prettiest institution in the state of Idaho. But that's just my personal bias, quite frankly. But we are not a very large campus when you look at our prime campus here compared to some other institutions that may be out there. And so you can clearly see the Kibbe Dome, but those are some of the other landmarks here on campus. The Student Union, we're in the administration building auditorium right now. The president's residence or university house is just up the hill from us. And then I identified 4 fraternities and sororities as residential chapters because we do allow our first-year students to live on our residence. The crime itself happened here, right on the doorstep to the institution. It was off campus. So it was not very far away. And truthfully, when you look at it from a residential standpoint, it was a 2-minute walk to Sigma Chi. That's where one of our victims lived, Ethan Chapin. And so it is literally in the doorstep of the institution. The majority of our students live off campus, even though we do require first-year students to live off campus. And when you think about the impact on our student experience and what it looked like, I often look at what does a residential campus mean? Well, it doesn't mean just the students living on campus in our fraternities and our residence halls. It also means students living in the umbrella around the institution. And so these crosses are where students live as well, too. The majority of those folks where this crime occurred are students. And so that had a massive impact when you have media descending to campus, setting up shop right in the backyard for our students, still walking to class, navigating that alleyway, those conversations with media that were very invasive, very intrusive, and it was very traumatizing for many of our students. Sunday, November 13th. Quite frankly, it was a beautiful day here in Moscow in the Pacific Northwest. We just had a home game the night before. It was a lot of fun for our students. And at 11:58 a.m., a phone call, 911 call was placed for an unconscious individual. That didn't come to the university, that went to law enforcement. Within 30 minutes, campus leadership was being notified. I was at Costco when I got the phone call from Captain Tyson Barrett. Our executive director for campus safety and security, he was on a river. I think the president, I think he was watching football when he got the phone call from that standpoint. We were all doing our slow Sunday afternoon duties, responsibilities from that standpoint. Within the hour, 1:03, we sent out our first vandal alert, notifying that there was a crime on the King Road area. Important to notify where it was because, again, the students in that residential space, and to stay away and shelter in place. We didn't have a lot of information. We didn't have a lot of details right off the bat. And during this time frame, leadership was scrambling to get back to campus as quickly as possible. We were setting up Zoom communications for those that were remote and Zoom call-in for those that were on the way back. In fact, just on a personal anecdote, I literally had to have my wife drive back from Costco because I was texting and I was calling and I was focusing otherwise. And I'm so thankful for what she did. We removed our shelter in place at 2:40 p.m. under the advice of Moscow Police Department because they didn't see an imminent threat to the campus. And that's always created a weird awkwardness because it's like, well, if you didn't have someone in custody, how can you no longer say there was a threat? The issue was imminent threat. Obviously, the police had identified that the crime had occurred several hours before. We felt it was important for people to get back to their homes, back there safely, but we did warn about vigilance from that standpoint. During this whole afternoon, we worked very closely with MPD. We set up shop in the president's office. We engaged actively with them. And I think by late afternoon, they let us know who the students were so that we could start looking up parent contact information. Now, there was a lot of students that were actually at that residence that morning, I think roughly about 10 or so. One of them was the victim's brother, who also was a fraternity member of his in Sigma Chi. So we were working very closely to try to provide information to the Moscow police as they were working an active crime scene from that standpoint. We didn't notify individuals once we had the names because we were working with the police department to keep that very quiet so that they can conduct their investigation. And I'll be honest, as an administrator, it's hard for me to have information and not want to reach out because I knew 4 students that were involved in sororities and fraternities. And quite frankly, they were already talking about it. They knew because they had friends that were at the residence and they were communicating. But our protocol at the institution is we don't do any formal notification until we know the families had been notified. It would be absolutely horrific for a family member to find out about it through media or social media. And so we're very careful about that. We provided our third vandal update, just basically providing information to the extent we knew for what was going on, saying more information to come. It was a very long day. And then at 6 o'clock, I personally went with many of my colleagues in the Dean of Students Office who are here, Counseling and Mental Health Center who are also here, to visit the chapters where we started doing official notifications of that horrific incident, verifying what the students already knew. We met again as a leadership team, emergency response team at 7:30 that night via Zoom to talk about what do we do, what are next steps, where are we at, what's the latest information. And it was at that time we made the decision as an institution to cancel classes for the following day. We sent out our final vandal alert about 9:15, basically saying check your email for email updates, and that's where we notified the campus. In the meantime, we were reaching out to the faculty member of the deceased students, as well as the college deans. The provost and I met with the college deans of the students who had died, just letting them know that they had lost students in their college, their faculty members may need support. And then we start the notification process for the classes from what that looks like. The next time frame is that this all happened the week before Thanksgiving break. And so the first day back, it was just, it was absolute blur, quite frankly. We were doing care and support. We were getting inundated with phone calls and emails from parents scared out of their minds for their students, saying, why don't you cancel classes the rest of the week? We made the intentional call not to do that, and it was the right call to make because we had many students that didn't have anywhere to go. We had a lot of international students that didn't have the ability to return home. And we also knew many students needed something to focus on. And so remaining open for those that wanted it, that wanted to go to class, was an absolute important decision to make because engagement like that can help out with the mental health stress. But we also were very supportive of students who needed to step away, that wanted to go home. We said, if you need to go, just go. We'll work with your faculty. And our faculty were just absolutely magnificent in how they navigated this, providing care and support to our students through this very difficult time. As I said, media descended on campus. There were cameras everywhere. They were engaging students, holding microphones up. The formal media, while challenging at times, were actually pretty good. It was the social media folks that really was absolutely horrific. People looking for the likes, people creating a lot of stories just to tell a narrative. And it was horrible, absolutely horrible for our students as well as our faculty and staff that were the targets of these speculations out there. There was a press conference held on the 16th by our Moscow Police Department that we participated in. And again, just from a personal anecdote, I've never experienced anything like that in my life. It's something you see in the news and the media. I hope to never experience anything like that again unless I win the lottery, quite frankly. But it was just horrible to see all these cameras. And they were out there to tell their story, not to tell our story. So I'm really proud with how we communicated over the weeks and months later because that was us taking control of the narrative and telling our story. I remember a specific conversation with Terry Golick, our athletic director, about men's basketball game. We had a basketball game that night. And she made the correct call by saying we should still hold the basketball game, but let's make it open and available to anybody that wants to come because we needed to be in community. We needed to be in a space where we could come together and move forward with life, not forgetting what had happened. And so I really appreciate Terry's leadership in making that very tough decision. And this is an image that I took of the basketball team. They had put on shirts, Greek life shirts with a heart on the back. I don't know if that stands out very well in that image, but it was something that was really beautiful to see because they did that intentionally to show their care, love, and support for our community. This is the communication that went out from the athletic department to the larger community, inviting folks to come into community. And we also didn't make just the basketball game open. We had a volleyball game the very next night as well on that Thursday that was available for the public. I went to that as well, and that was a great experience for people that came and showed up to cheer on, to support. It was beautiful to be in those spaces at that time. November 19th through the 27th was Thanksgiving break. This is where we caught our breath. Many students went home. They didn't want to be here. Many of their parents didn't want them here, quite frankly. Again, we were having a lot of phone calls. People were terrified. We had students that lived in the King Road area that chose not to leave their house till it was broad daylight because they were so fearful of going outside at night. So when the light came up and it was mid-morning and there were a lot of people out in the house, that's when students felt safe to leave. We were still doing a lot of planning, and I know the provost worked with our academic leadership to make the decision that we were going to go to a remote option for students after Thanksgiving break, notified our faculty members of it to be very accommodating for students that chose not to return back to campus, and they did, again, a phenomenal job to help out. And we were engaged with daily briefings with the police. We were doing 2 a day, and 1 in the morning and 1 in the evening, just to get updates to the extent we could. And they were very understandably very closed on how much information they shared with us, but they would ask us questions, and we were providing them information to the extent that we could under law. November 27th through the 30th, that was when classes returned. And actually, we saw quite a few students return to campus. And I'm pretty confident it's because that's when we chose to have the vigil, which was the Wednesday after Thanksgiving break. We were very intentional not doing it before the break, mainly because many students had already left campus. And so there was conversation, should we have 2 vigils? What does that look like? We made the intentional decision to do it after the break. It was an important thing. Many students came back to attend the vigil, which was a beautiful ceremony. But our police department was very nervous because, again, we did not have anyone in custody. We didn't even have an idea who it was. I don't know if our police department did at that point in time either. But they were like, please host this indoors. We used the weather, and we had very inclement weather. We had a big snowstorm. We were going to do it out here on the admin lawn, but we chose to move it inside because we could then have security present at that event. We had metal detectors that we were pushing everyone through because we didn't know what this individual who committed this crime might try to do next to do something. But that was a very real situation. We had family members of the victims attend that. I'm very thankful for their participation. Quite frankly, their strength and resiliency through this time was also incredible. Their messages of love, caring, and support for one another still just take my breath away when I think about it. We had a beautiful ceremony, each light signifying the 4 students that we lost, Ethan, Azana, Kaylee, and Maddie. December 1st through December 31st, this is where we started moving our mindset towards thinking about what happens in the future. What do we do? How long might this take? Obviously, we didn't know. I always felt very confident that we were going to find the individual that did this or individuals, but no one had any idea how quickly it happened. We started talking about fall commencement, winter commencement that we were going to do. How do we honor students there? Our provost and our leadership were thinking about what does the spring semester look like if someone isn't captured or arrested for the crime. We also had another athletic event, the Vandal Swim Meet, which again, they did a wonderful job commemorating the 4 students there. Then December 30th came. It was like a weight that was lifted off of everybody's collective shoulders. Knowing that someone was in custody was amazing for us as an institution. I literally could feel the stress leaving my shoulders once that announcement came out. It was I'm nothing but proud of our Moscow Police Department, how hard they worked, how quickly they were able to go through it, as well as the community members that submitted tips to help identify those individuals. Moving into spring semester, we were very anxious and nervous about what enrollment would look like, especially had someone not been arrested. We were actually preparing for a decrease in enrollment. And anecdotally, I talked to many students, and several of them told me they would not have enrolled spring semester had there not been an arrest. Their parents weren't going to support them coming back here because they felt it was too dangerous, it wasn't safe, and whatnot. Part of our messaging to students, too, was also understanding, though, crime happens everywhere. That's the sad reality of it. It happens on your campuses. It happened here. We can't prevent crime, but what we can do is increase our vigilance and understand what care and support looks like collectively. So we did a lot of education through the spring semester about vigilance. We had town halls, and we offered ongoing care and support. Immediately after the crimes, we had drop-in counseling at the counseling center in our student union. Anyone could walk in, our students, our employees. That was welcome and support. And through the start of the spring semester, we did that again. But again, media came and descended on campus at the start of the semester. A lot of things. I remember messaging out to students that you do not have to talk to media if you do not want to. Just be polite and keep walking. Just tell them you don't want to do it. We had students in the King Road area literally put signs on their door saying, please do not knock on our door and ask us questions. They were communicating directly because they were just getting cold called by people walking up with cameras and opening the door, and you have this big camera in your face. And so, again, very traumatizing for our students. We had a beautiful spring commencement ceremony where we honored 2 of our students with posthumous degrees. We also awarded 2 certificate degrees to the other 2 students that were victims as well. It was a wonderful ceremony. We've established scholarships, we're doing fundraisers, and we're working on establishing a Vandal Healing Garden and Memorial. And actually, if you use your phone, I don't know if you can bring it up, it'll bring up the website where you can learn more about it. And we have what's known as a call for inspiration out right now, where anybody, you all included, can submit an idea or concept for what the Vandal Healing Garden and Memorial can look like for our students. And the garden is going to go more to do more than just honor these 4 students. It's going to honor any Vandal that we lose over the years that's enrolled at the University of Idaho. And there's also an opportunity for you to donate to help bring this into creation, if you so wish to do. That's a brief summary of what it looked like. What I'd love to do now is have Keilani Hardyway, one of our student athletes who's going to be our facilitator and moderator for our conversation, come up, and then we'll have the panel come up and join. So please help me welcome Keilani.
Hi, I'm Keilani Hardyway. I am on the track and field team here at U of I. I am technically a senior who's finishing my bachelor's this fall, and God willing, I start my master's in the spring. But I get the honor to be your moderator today for the panel. A little bit about me: I'm from Oceanside, California, originally. I've never been to Idaho until I came here for track. I've loved being here. I've loved the people I've met, and I'm very, 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 very proud to be a Vandal. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome up our panelists as they come up. And yeah, you can give them a round of applause. Also like to just preface by saying if at any point any of you guys have any questions, concerns, we want to make sure those get answered to the best of our ability. So throughout this panel, our panelists will be answering questions, but there are mics at the front of the stage that at any time you can just come up and ask a question. If you don't feel comfortable coming up to a mic, you can also maybe just try to raise your hand. I'll see you. Shout your question, and I will do my best to hear that question, repeat it so our panelists can answer it. And we're going to go ahead and start at the far end of the table with Dr. Nash. You guys are just going to introduce yourself, tell the people who you are, and we'll work our way down.
All right, let's see. Can you guys hear me? So my name is Dr. Trish Nash. I'm a licensed psychologist with the Counseling and Mental Health Center. I'm also a certified mental health consultant, so I'm also a sports psychologist. I'm embedded in athletics part-time, so I divide my time between our counseling center and athletics.
Hi, my name is Lee Espy, and I'm the Division Operations Officer for Finance and Administration, and the Office of Public Safety and Security is under my purview.
Hi, I'm Holly Keir. I'm a recent graduate and swimmer that was on the Vandal Swim and Dive team here. I graduated with computer science, and I'm originally from Toronto, Canada.
Good morning. My name is Tori Lawrence. I serve as Provost and Executive Vice President here at the university. I've been in that role for 3 years, but have been at the institution for 25.
I'm Jody Walker. I'm the Executive Director of Communications and co-CMO. The scope of my work involves reputation, media relations, and communications for the university, and I have been at the university for 10 years.
And hello, once again, I'm Blaine Eccles, Dean of Students and Vice Provost for Student Affairs, and I've been here since 2015.
Yeah. So we're just going to go ahead and kick off the panel with our first question. It's going to be for Lee, as our Division Operations Manager who oversees campus safety. Can you walk us through the immediate notification process and communication with Moscow PD?
Sure. So I think to start this conversation, I'd like to preface it with a description about our relationship with Moscow PD. We have a team of Moscow police officers embedded on our campus. We have a contractual agreement, and they work hand in hand with us on a daily basis. They're co-located with our Office of Public Safety and Security. And that relationship was really the basis for smooth, clear communication on the day of the event. And so, as Dr. Eccles mentioned earlier, on the morning of the event, we have a captain who's assigned to the campus, and he reached out to our Office of Public Safety and Security, as well as the Dean of Students office, to let us know within minutes that this tragedy had happened and that they believed that the victims were students. We pulled together our team using our general phone tree that involves the office or the university communications and marketing, the dean of students, the office of the provost, the office of the president, as well as our operations team, to go ahead and start thinking about communication immediately. As Dr. Eccles mentioned, much of this was on the fly, over the phone, over Zoom, but our goal was to get the initial communication out immediately to campus saying an incident had occurred. The victims, the information was unknown still regarding exactly what had happened with the victims, as well as whether an assailant was in custody or not. And so we work diligently. We have templates, we have things like that for smooth communication. Obviously, we didn't have a template for this, but we started with that and worked as a team over the phone to get it out through our mass communication process, and we're able to do it within about an hour. I want to say that Captain Barrett was with us all along the way, both virtually as well as in person, once we moved to the president's office to start managing the event. And so that communication was seamless. Captain Barrett was available virtually, and then eventually came and briefed the team, and was available in person for the rest of the afternoon.
And Dean, from your point of view, can you tell us how things were on your side of things as far as communicating a message out to students?
Yeah, that first day is a lot of chaos, but I think when you bring your team together, you're able to talk through what you're going to do and how you're going to communicate. And so the initial communications to students, at least through the first about 5 hours, was not just to students, but the entire campus, because we didn't have the ability to communicate out that they were students specifically just yet, even though that was known for a lot of folks, because we wanted to make sure that we were having families notified by law enforcement first and foremost. But once we were able to identify the individuals, knew that the families were out, then we directly engaged with the students. And we always start with affinity groups. Who are they connected with? Who are their classes? Who are their social networks? And so we started with the chapters first and foremost. We had teams from the Dean of Students Office, Counseling Center, myself, where we literally went and talked to those individuals, walked into the room. You walk into a room of 60 students sitting together, crying and sobbing and acknowledging what they already know to verify that it happened. It's an emotional time. And so from that moment, we left individuals there to help those students process through it. Then we went to the next chapter, then the next chapter. The next day, we're very intentional with reaching out to the classes of the students, knowing that they might not know yet, because we hadn't released that night. Their names were not out in the media yet, so not everyone knew. And it gave us space and time to reach out to those individuals first. So we do it in concentric rings. Start with the known and you work outwards. Once we knew classes were notified, we also checked to know, are they involved in any clubs or organizations? We try to reach those folks before we put out a broader communication. It wasn't until the next day that we actually acknowledged in a public communication of the names of the individual students. But by then we had notified the majority of their friends from that standpoint. It's hard knowing information and not being able to acknowledge it with students. But they were those that were closest to them already knew, because Ethan had a brother and a sister in a fraternity and sorority here on campus. He was a triplet. He was one of 3 that came here at the same time with his siblings. And so many students in our fraternity and sorority system were already aware.
And Holly, you get to provide a unique perspective because you yourself were a student athlete at the time. Can you tell us how that was, receiving that text? What was going through your head?
Yeah, so we received a vandal alert while I was at home. They kind of all come in at different times. So my roommate's sitting there with this alert that I have not gotten yet. And it tells you that there's a homicide investigation in King Road. And as was mentioned, that a ton of students lived in that area. And you're instantly thinking about, who do I know that lived around there? Have I heard from them the night before? Have I heard from them this morning? And you kind of knew that there's going to be someone that you know personally that knew them personally, just with how small our campus is and how tight our community is, or it's going to be someone you knew. So we were sitting there kind of scared. We had one roommate at work at the pool, and we're all in shelter in place, and you're not sure exactly what's going on and who it was, but you're definitely kind of questioning and thinking about who haven't I heard from? And that was kind of a worrying point. By the end of the night, I had heard through the grapevine of who it was believed to be. Of course, we had no confirmation on that. But again, like as it's been mentioned, there was all these circles and they all overlap. And it was definitely a kind of a scary time because you can't imagine it happening, especially not on this type of campus.
Absolutely. I remember getting the vandal alert, and I was sitting on my couch, and fortunately a lot of my teammates live in the same complex, so we had some people over, and then we had more teammates come over and say, hey, did you get the vandal alert? And I think it's different from we've had different vandal alerts over time where it's a robbery or it's an incident, but when you see the word, say, homicide, your mind ultimately is like, this is not a movie. This is happening right now. And you don't think it'll happen to you until it happens. And I remember we were locking the doors. No one left. Just asking questions through the grapevine. What's happening? What's going on? Does anybody know anything? Which there's also a downside to that because people like to play cop. They like to fill in the blanks. Oh, I heard this. I heard that. And not taking into consideration families who were directly affected, victims, families, and hearing that through the grapevine. You never want to hear things like that. So it was definitely scary, unsettling. I remember calling my parents as well saying there's a homicide and they're freaking out and I don't know what else to tell them other than what I know, which wasn't a lot at the time. And so all we could do was be patient. But it was definitely a first. And so Jody, the next question is for you. As our Senior Director of Communications, the media attention on this was absolutely crazy, especially being that we're in such a small town. And the media attention on our campus and community. Can you share with us about what you experienced as the campus point of contact and what were some of the unforeseen challenges that came about?
So as you can imagine, in a world of social media, news was out immediately. And we started hearing from national outlets as well as our state and local media. And because of how and where this incident happened, we were able to really turn our focus on our primary audiences, which are students and our employees. And we did just that. For the first 24 hours, we didn't respond to media. We took the calls, we logged them, we knew what was coming in, we did not respond to them. We didn't know enough to have anything worthwhile to say. It was a crime scene, therefore the police had the lead on speaking with the media as far as the crime went. So we really focused our attention internally and worked with the greater team to get the communications out to help our students and our employees feel as safe as possible in a situation that was far beyond anything any of us could imagine. And then we very quickly realized that those communications worked very well to share out to the media as our official response for the university because of the crime occurring off campus. It really was the role of the PD to lead that investigation, to be part of that investigation. We could focus internally. And so we didn't comment on the crime itself. We didn't comment on any of that. All of our responses, all of our support for our employees and our students really came through those communications, and we shared those out. And that seemed to go really well. We did get to see firsthand media misbehaving and students reaching out and saying, I'm just trying to go to class. I'm just trying to continue on in my life. And everywhere I go, there's a camera in my face. And that's where we worked with the dean of students to provide them with some messaging of, what do you have to do? You do not have to speak to them. You can if you choose, but don't feel compelled to. And here are some steps you can take to make sure that you can get across campus in a way that makes you feel the most comfortable in this very unique and challenging situation. So as I started with, we really had this unique opportunity to be able to focus solely on our internal audience, and that was how we went about that in the first week.
I want to interject here just real quick. I've done interviews before. I know many of you all have too, but this is the first time I've really had a lot of experience with media trying to drive a narrative or a storyline through their questioning of me. And one of the things that popped out with one of the branches of media was how they were trying to drive a wedge between the university and Moscow Police Department, referencing, do you think they're capable? Do you think they're handling this well? Are they competent to do this work? Intentional language and words that they're trying to get us to say something that will undermine Moscow Police Department. It is really, you could quickly tell the storyline that they were wanting to tell versus what we were doing. And Jody did a phenomenal job with us, just coaching us to say, stick to the facts, stick to what you know, and don't work in the area of speculation, because that's not going to help anybody and whatnot. And so I really appreciate her guidance on that, and watching our president and our provost engage in those similar conversations and how they navigated through it. It was wonderful to be able to sit back and learn from them from that aspect of it too.
Yeah, and you mentioned just people wanting to constantly know things that you yourself at the moment don't know, so therefore you can't give them an answer. Obviously, we had school the next day, so Provost Lawrence, you had to make the call on, were we going to have class? Were classes going to be limited? What was the plan? Can you tell me a little bit more about that process?
Sure. Of course, we had some experience around this with COVID. And I'll be honest, some of the experiences we had in COVID directly related to this. And one of them was, how do you change your operations? I think everybody here realizes you can't close a university like you can close a store and lock the door and put a sign out front. We have international students. We have students that live here no matter what we do. So we had to take that into consideration. As has been mentioned already, we decided on Sunday evening, the night of the murders, that we would not have classes on Monday. And I'm using that word very carefully, because we canceled classes. We did not close the campus, because we felt like there were people that needed to come together. We had a lot of people on campus to support students. And that was an interesting call, because we had some employees frankly just not excited about that, but we also were quite flexible and tried to be flexible through this whole time. So we canceled classes on Monday in honor of those students. We discussed canceling classes for the week or 2 days or 3 days, and there is no playbook for this. And our best judgment was, let's start with Monday and see where we go. And on Monday, we realized that, well, frankly, there were a lot of people on campus. We also had a lot of students, they were already leaving. And we recognized we had to be really flexible during that week. So we did, if students asked to go or just left, that was fine. We supported that. And we asked our faculty to be very flexible. You got to remember, at this point in time, there were a lot of assumptions. I think everybody went to the assumption that it was a gun-related event. And so there was a big surprise, I think, to everyone at some point in time that it was not a gun. The other assumption was that we would have someone in custody within a day or 2 days. And frankly, that became a bit of a, it was very difficult to know what to do looking forward when we had no idea. And I remember getting later into that week and we realized we may not have someone in the near future. And then we had to start talking about longer term. So then we decided at the beginning of the Thanksgiving week, and I'll be honest, that timing was very helpful to have the week of Thanksgiving coming up right away. Later, I had a chance to talk to the provost at Michigan State after their tragedy in early spring, and they had 3 weeks before spring break, and that was a real struggle for them of what to do with 3 weeks before a real chance to kind of reset. So we had Thanksgiving week, but we decided on Tuesday that we had to remain flexible until someone was apprehended, which turned out to be the rest of the semester. We had 3 weeks after Thanksgiving. And so we said we asked faculty to try to accommodate students wherever they were, whether they were in Moscow in a classroom or they'd gone home or whatever the case may be. And that was a challenge, but I was actually very proud of our faculty who After years of asking them to be flexible, we're flexible again. And frankly, we had really no pushback because everyone realized that students had to deal with this in their own way, and that we just needed to be supportive of them. So that's kind of how we dealt with classes there in those 5 weeks.
And at this time, I would like to open it up to anybody who has questions in the audience, if there are any.
Thank you. I'm just wondering what it was like for you personally. I mean, you're out there doing jobs, you're doing responsible things, you're working very hard, things are going fast, but it must have been difficult on all of you as you're trying to process everything at the same time. So I always wonder about the health and care of those who are leading in a difficult time like that.
I'll start with that question. I'll be honest, as a dean of students, I like to think I have about 10,000 children, right? And I felt I had let individuals down because parents bring their students to the university with the understanding that they're going to be coming back home to them. Now, clearly, we weren't responsible for what happened, but from a personal standpoint, whenever we lose a student, I feel a significant loss that what more could I have done to help offset or mitigate or alleviate that? And so, you know, as a person, from how I process my emotions, I do it like I push it down, I focus on work, and I engage that way. And then through a longer period of time, I'll talk with folks about it and do that and work it out. I have the most amazing partner and wife who was very understanding. When I was playing my Fortnite games for a couple hours at a time to just take a break from reality, she was very supportive of me doing that and engaging in positive things. And ultimately, where I get my resiliency from is by going to do student events and engagement, going to athletic events, going to plays, going to performances, because our students are so inspiring. And that is very healing for me. Seeing that there are positive things that still happen and go forward in the world helps me remember that it's not always darkness. It's not always going to be hard. And so our students were my savior in so many ways.
Thank you for your question.
I'll add to that a little bit if I can. One of the things that I think we all had to do a little bit was compartmentalize what we were dealing with. And yet we all had to step out for a moment. I remember probably one of the hardest times was when we got the names from the police, and Blaine and I were instantly in our student information system trying to understand, who are these people? You know, oh, one's a sophomore, one's a senior, you know, where do they live? What are they studying? And that became very real. But we were also very supportive of each other. That basketball game on Wednesday, we had the press conference, which was a big moment on Wednesday afternoon. I remember Blaine and Jody and I went to we went to the basketball game, and it was a great distraction because for basically 4 days we had just been going. And so I think supporting each other was a big part of it.
And I'd like to add one other thing. I think Dr. Eckel said it well, that we weren't responsible for what happened, but once we knew about it, we were responsible for the students that we had. And then so from a safety and security perspective, we really had to think about what would we do differently? How do we increase our numbers? How do we increase visibility? And so I think for me, at least, that is what weighed on me on a daily basis, is in terms of our responsibility to our students and their families.
And thank you all for being here and sharing this. And actually, that leads exactly into my question. In terms of student needs, there's like short-term needs, and then there were long-term needs. And so I'm wondering if you could speak about that, especially maybe, we have SHAC on it, which is student health and counseling on our campus. Did you see therapy, open access for students, or was safety their big concern and a short-term? And then long-term, what have you seen? Do people want to just kind of move on? Are there kind of still groups that are engaging over this and kind of talking about how to work through what the goal of the university is, which is success of their students?
I can speak to part of that, and it comes in later questions as well. I think we're still seeing a lot of the long-term effects because it really hasn't been that long. It's only been 6 months. We're not seeing all of the long-term effects that will come up with any sort of trauma and tragedy. And to add on to the previous question, this was a tragedy that wasn't just on campus. When something violent happens, the whole community was having responses. And so from my perspective, you're hearing it from not just the students, but the staff members, the community members, everybody wondering and wanting to fill information and trying to figure out what's going on when they felt like there was not a lot of information to have. And much like Dr. Eccles said, it was hard when you have information and can't share information to keep that and have to tell, a lot of students in campus to trust the security, trust what the university is trying to do when, they're not getting all of the information. And, we live in an age of information where everybody just wants information as fast as they can get it. I think with the immediate effects, it was kind of divided. There were students that were, based on, dependent on their background, students that just wanted to say this can happen anywhere and it's going to happen and I know that this happens, and wanted to just kind of rationalize that. And then there were students that didn't want to leave their house and wanted to stay home. We're talking about people that would just shut themselves in. The services immediately after were very well utilized by students. The drop-in hours were very well utilized. During that post-Thanksgiving break, I think there were a lot of students that did come back, and I wouldn't say services increased or there was more people seeking counseling, but it was one of the most common topics in counseling was, how do we deal with all of the unknowns, or how do we navigate when you already have anxiety and then you're adding on all of these layers of not knowing what's going on. And I think in the long term, it's still being processed. I think that immediate shock has started to lift a little bit, but we're still having to go into the process of, what are the next steps and how do we deal with it? So I think there was a little lull of waiting during spring, and I imagine it's going to just keep coming in waves as this process of the next steps happen.
Sadly, we've got several court proceedings in front of us that will re-traumatize and bring up all the feelings and emotions that students have navigated. And I'm nothing but proud of how our employees in our Counseling and Mental Health Center and our Dean of Students Office, how they're responding. We call upon our students to be caretakers of one another as well, too. Because as a land-grant institution, I like to think we're planting seeds all the time. There's nothing you can say or do to help someone resolve their grief. Grief is something you have to navigate through. But we implore students, and as a Vandal family, we navigate through this together. And so we encourage students to reach out on behalf of their friends when they're struggling. I might not want to seek out help, but Jody knows I need it. So she's reaching out on my behalf saying, I've got a friend here, I'm struggling. So we get those care reports, and we do a really good job of responding to help students like Jody navigate through that in communication with me, or do a soft handoff so that we can do that and help and follow up. And again, I'm really proud of our students and how they do that.
Thanks for the question. And we'll go ahead and take one more.
I would actually like to hear a little bit more in depth from both of the student athletes up here, and also Terry. I'm going to put you on the student athletes always have a little more microscope put on them, and you were going through this with the rest of the community. But as was mentioned, basketball game brought everyone together. That same time, student athletes hang out with student athletes. And so I'd like to know a little bit more about what your experience and what the mental health and of the overall student athlete population, and really what you did, Terry. You should be up there too. But so that's my question.
Holly, you want to give it a go?
Yeah, so as a senior, I look at my team and I think that they're all kind of like my siblings, my younger siblings for sure. And they are only in their 3rd month of college, and this is sprung upon them, and they're already struggling on being away from home and all that. And I'd been here this would be my 4th year. So I kind of felt like I had to support all of them. Everyone was kind of handling everything differently, and people were leaving, but I know that we were all so close together, and we all were like supporting each other so much. And I think it came across from the entire student athlete population that like we are here and we're doing our sport and we're doing something that we love. And unfortunately, there's a whole other thing, especially being in season, like now there's a whole other focus that's going on in our life. And we're there to compete and we're there to perform, but there's so much other things. It kind of put it in perspective that like our sports aren't just the only thing going on in our life. And it was kind of like hard, but you definitely had to compartmentalize. And I think I used my sport as an escape from it. I continued to go to practice, and we continued to compete. It was almost like an escape from it because it was the one time, because you couldn't use your phone as an escape anymore. It was everywhere on social media. It was everywhere. No matter where you went, it was there. Everyone you knew was talking about it. But I got to go into the pool and I got to 2 hours of just my own headspace and I got to be somewhere else. So I really used my own sport as like a way of being away from it. But I knew that we had like endless support behind us from our athletic training staff and from Terry and everyone, that we could turn to people for help, and we didn't need to be competing or we didn't need to be performing the way we're expected to on a normal basis. But I used it as a way of getting away from it all, for sure.
Yeah, I'd say my experience is a little similar to Holly's. So she was actually in season at the time. I'm on the track and field team, so we have one meet before we leave for winter break. So we were getting ready for a meet at that time. Season was getting ready to start. And it was definitely, do I go home or do I continue to practice and finish what I ultimately have been working up to as far as preseason goes? And fortunately, my coaches gave me the option. They gave our team the option. They said, you don't have to stay. If you want to leave, you can leave. We're not counting it against you at all. We just want you to feel the safest. We want you to feel comfortable and make the right decision for you. Obviously, it's not a team sport, but it is a team sport. So these people who I spend a majority of my days with, I'm asking, are you going home? How are you feeling about things? And one thing I want to point out is, even though I didn't know the victims personally, one of them was one of my classmates. If you didn't know them personally, you knew someone who knew them personally. And I remember the Monday coming back after it happened, it was just like grief consumed the air. Like, even if you weren't directly affected by it, you still felt that. You still felt people mourning. You still felt their sadness, taking into consideration what actually really happened for people lost their life who didn't deserve to lose their life. And so there's a lot of pressure and there's a lot of stress that comes with being a student athlete. But realizing that there's a world outside of your sport, you definitely felt that. And I definitely used my meet that was coming up as a distraction. I'd go to practice, and although things didn't necessarily feel great, I know I didn't have to look at my phone. I know we didn't have to talk about it. I didn't have family members calling me constantly. How are you doing? What's happening? Any word? It was just, I'm going to practice. I'm going to spend time with my teammates. And I know at that time, I love my team. We're very close. We were doing a bunch of things together. We were having movie nights. We were having game nights. People were just coming over to do homework because then again, we're student athletes. So we still have school to think about, and just really supporting each other at the time, checking in. How are you doing? What can I be doing to better support you, not just as your teammate, but as your friend? I would say just seeking the resources that were offered by the university and taking advantage of them and not feeling bad or like you were weak for needing to talk to someone was key. But yeah, the experience was a first for a lot of people, I feel like. And I think we're still navigating that. And so, yeah, thanks for asking. And Terry, did you want to speak on that?
I knew Janie would make me talk, so. What I'd start with is I'm surrounded by great people. So as an administrator, one of the things that you think about doing is, well, let's just pull the whole department together and have a meeting. I decided not to do that. The reason being, I trust all these people. I trust my coaches. They know how to handle their team. I didn't want to try to jam a big meeting together to try to facilitate it because I thought that might be what might me feel good. I didn't want to do that. And that's what I say. I'm so proud to be a Vandal part of this department and university. Sorry. And I also want to say one thing we haven't spoken a lot about is what our governor did, what the president did, and Lee did, and pulled in. When you drive to campus after an incident like this, and you come into town and you see not one, not two, not three, not four, 5 dogs, police handling dogs. You have the state police, you have the FBI here. You're at a volleyball match and there's more police than we had fans. I just started talking to the police and said, I trust what you're doing. I know you can't tell us anything. You have to do what you need to do. I appreciate you. And you guys might not realize this, but the police lived in the dorm. Targhee Hall, that's basically not a great dorm. I've never been in it. And then they were eating in the ISEB. Brilliant idea, in my opinion, because then we all felt safe. So that was a big part of it too. And unfortunately, we couldn't have the police on the panel. We thought about it, but there'll be a trial coming up, so that wasn't possible. So really, really difficult, but people pulled together and the community was amazing. And there were people in the community, business owners, that got really upset with folks coming in and invading our community and trying to say, they couldn't believe what this community is like, the tight community, the campus, what we offer here. They just couldn't believe it. They wanted to dig and dig and dig. And finally, some of the business owners said, enough. And that was a really cool thing. So dang it, Janie. Does anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, if anybody else had any questions, we can keep going on that.
Good. I'm glad you guys are speaking.
Holly and Kaylani, I just wanted to hear from you guys from the student athlete perspective, and what you heard from others. Like, how were your coaches effective and how could they be more effective, and how they helped you through the process?
We got a text Sunday night, and I looked back on it before this, and it was nothing but support. And we knew both Coach Mark and Coach Morgan and Coach Jim were all going to be there for us. And it was always about our safety first, but it was also about trying to have normalcy. So I felt nothing but support from our coaching staff. I couldn't say, like, there's no way they could have handled it any better. Like, it just, you knew exactly where you could turn to. We're a very close team, and Coach Mark is nothing but supportive of us always, and I have a close relationship with him. And watching him talk to us and say, lock your doors, make sure you're not walking alone, that was kind of when I was scared. Because I knew he was, and I knew he saw us as we're all his children. And him being worried was what worried me. But he made sure that we all knew we were safe. We knew we could go home. We could take any time that we needed. And he pushed back practice time so we weren't in the dark and everything like that. And honestly, we all just gathered around each other the most, and I felt like I was supported and I had everything I needed to be able to cope with everything that was going on.
Yeah, I think I'm very fortunate, and I think it's safe to say that all of the coaching staff here at the Vandal, or in the Vandal family, was very supportive of their athletes. It's easy to think as a student athlete, you kind of have this obligation to perform always, no matter what's going on. But my coaches specifically made it a point to know, for us to know that we could leave if we wanted to, we could also stay, and they were going to be there for us no matter what, whether it was a phone call to talk or coming in the office to meet with them. And I think something that we didn't necessarily think about was they were going through this at the same time that we were. It's easy to think, well, me, I need this coach, and not take into consideration of they're trying their best because they want to be there for you, but at the same time, they're trying to be strong as well and figure out how they're feeling and what exactly they're going through. I remember at the time, a couple weeks later, we were also scheduled to have team dinners at our coach's house, and people didn't really know what was going on. We didn't have anybody in custody, and not everybody drives on our team. So I know the coaches made it a point to make sure that people had rides. If they wanted to come, if they wanted to eat dinner, if they wanted to play games, they had rides. They weren't walking alone. They were going with someone. And I would just say supportive is the only word that I can use to express the way that our coaches handled things. And I'm not just talking about, oh, you can go home if you like sending out an email. That's the bare minimum. It was making sure you genuinely knew, because obviously as a track and field athlete, there's a lot of people on our team. It's not just 5 people. So I commend my coaches for reaching out to us as individuals and not assuming that we were okay, or we were handling it better than we actually were.
I was going to add on quickly. One thing that really stood out to me, and I can't speak for every sport, but was football took out a whole meeting and they just met with the guys and had conversation questions in groups to talk through things, to provide a space. And when you think about football, you don't often think about them having an emotional conversation, but I know that happened, and they opened up that space for those athletes to talk and just process through so that they knew who needed to talk. And I think a lot of the coaches did a great job with that space of just opening it up and allowing their athletes to have that space. I also heard so many times, even in the hallway, I listen all the time, people asking, hey, because it gets dark at 4:30, hey, do you need me to walk you to your car? Do you need a ride home? More often than I've ever heard, for people just like checking in on each other, just to make sure everybody felt safe. I thought that was just heartwarming and felt such like a bonding across sports that I hadn't seen here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this. I'm at Eastern Washington University, president there. And then it's like the worst experience you could ever think that you could have. So this is just your team that came together, Scott. Wonderful. And it inspired us as a campus, because we're not that far away, to think about security and how to make people feel more secure or feel like they could, have access to someone else. So as a result of what has happened, we ended up purchasing Rave, the software that allows you to connect with someone, let them know that you're walking and where you're going. So can I ask, is anything changed on your campus? Are you looking at safety and security differently? Thank you.
Sure, I'll speak to that. So, in the immediate aftermath of the event, we took a number of steps to increase our safety and security, increase the resilience in our safety and security through a variety of different institutions and partners. And, we always had this focus on our students, staff, and faculty, and listened as we learned from them. So a few things: we doubled our internal security. We hired external security and ensured that we had visual deterrence because we didn't have a suspect in custody at that point. And those visuals were also an affirmation to our campus that we were invested in this. And we also worked with Idaho State Police, President Green, and their leadership, as well as our governor, worked together to ensure that they were here to support us. At times, as Terry said, we had 4 or 5 state troopers patrolling our campus, eating in the cafeteria, sleeping in our dorms. So they were ever present and visible to the entire campus. We did things like we did a temporary pay increase for our security team in order to ensure the stability of that team, making sure that we had people there when we needed them. We also use Rave, and we're going to start using that function soon. It's a great software. But the other thing, and I think someone mentioned this before, is we started thinking about our community beyond the borders of the campus. Moscow doesn't exist without U of I. U of I doesn't exist without Moscow. But our Idaho State Police partners were willing to patrol neighborhoods, even though that's not what they were here to do, as were our hired security. And so we started patrolling the King Road area. So we started thinking more globally. And then we did things like having a safe ride, safe walk option. So our students could call a number if they felt unsafe walking home at night. And someone from our security team would accompany them to wherever they needed to go, even if it was off campus. And we continue that service today. So a lot has changed, and there's a lot kind of in the works in terms of next steps to implement different security protocols. But I think the main thing is that it really taught us that this is a never-ending project, right? It's always something that we're going to be thinking about.
I'll just add, not once as an administrator did I hear the president or the provost or vice president for finance say, how much is this going to cost?
Yep.
That never came up. It was always a question, what does our campus need? And it was met. And I'm so thankful for that kind of leadership, because as a dean of students, I can then say, this is what we need to do. And it's immediately supported to help address the needs of our campus and our students more than anything. They do a phenomenal job providing the resources when we need it. And I'm so thankful for that kind of leadership at this institution. We're coming out of a financial crisis, and someone gave credit to the governor. The governor stepped up in a big way for our institution as well, too. So, but that is how you lead through this. Not what's this going to cost us, but what do we need for our students? What do we need for our community? I'm just incredibly thankful for that kind of leadership.
I would build off of that, Blaine, in that you're absolutely right. There was never a what's this going to cost? And the ideas that we brought to them as a leadership team, or the ideas that we discussed of, what comes next, came from listening. We listened to our students. We talked to our students. The provost had mentioned that we went to that basketball game just days after the murders. And every student that Blaine came across, he asked them, what else can we be doing for you? What do you need? And all of that was gathered, and we listened to our employees and we listened to our community and acted on that in the moment. Oh, we think we need more security. Lee, what can you do to bring us more security? We need this, we need that. And our president was there every time to say yes to everything that we were hearing from our community that we needed. And that really allowed us to be agile and respond quickly and meet the needs as best we could in a situation that absolutely had no playbook. This is such a unique situation. If you look at others that have happened across the country, and unfortunately they happen far too often, they're absolutely tragic, but they're open and closed just about that quickly. The suspect is usually apprehended or is also deceased by the end of the day. This was not that. There was no playbook. There was no one to look to what do we do to navigate through this? And so as we saw those needs come up, each of us had our own ear to the ground with our own audiences, and we came together and we said, okay, what do we need to act on today? What can we change today to make things better for our audiences? And that was part of our success, I believe.
One thing I'll say as well, as a dean of students, we do try to engage our students on a regular basis. And we had listening sessions for students, and some of them weren't really well attended. But one thing I would encourage y'all to keep in mind is just because students don't show up doesn't mean that effort doesn't make an impact. Because knowing it's an option, knowing counseling is an option, even though they're not going to counseling, it's easy to access, sends a strong message of care and support for your students. And so engage in things even though you don't have a good attendance. We had several listening sessions for students. One day we only had 2 show up, which was totally fine. But it was important for those two to be able to engage with campus administrators. And they talk to their friends, they talk to their families, they message out what we're trying to do on behalf of our students too. So our responsibility collectively is to make sure the doors are open wide and easy for students to walk through. And then it's empowering our students to walk through it when they're ready to do so. They're not children that we work with. They are adults, and we need to treat them like adults and respect them like adults. They might be young adults and not have a lot of life experience, but quite frankly, who in this room has this kind of experience? So empower your students, trust that they can make good decisions, and they will when you support them doing so.
Yeah, and you mentioned opening doors, making sure doors were open. We opened the doors of the Kibbe Dome and we had a vigil. So can you tell us more about the planning process and the decision-making process, because there still were so many unknowns at the time?
Yeah, that vigil, it was difficult. Talk about team. We had an incredible team that helped work on that. You know, I knew early on, and we started conversations early on about the importance of a vigil, pulling community together from a healing perspective. And we were going to do it early that first week. I think that Wednesday evening after the murders initially happened. But so many students had left campus. So many had gone that we had to delay it. We knew we needed more time. We needed to think about it. And quite frankly, from a safety perspective, we didn't know how we could navigate this through a safe way. And so we made the conscious decision to delay it till after Thanksgiving to give us time to prepare, to plan, ideally to have a suspect in custody before that would happen. And when it looked like that wouldn't happen, our police department messaged out to us and said, we'd really like this to not be on the admin lawn. We'd like it to be in the Kibbe Dome where we can bring more security into play. We can have the metal detectors to have that happen. And that ended up being the right decision by and large for a multitude of reasons. One, we had a big snowstorm that day. I mean, a lot of snow dumped on the ground from a safety security standpoint. But two, we also had a lot of security peppered throughout the Kibbe Dome, making sure that we had safety. Because again, we didn't know who the individual was that may have done this, what else they might try to do. So that created a safe environment. But the third part of it also created a space for our families of the victims to participate to the extent that they wanted to. I think had we done something that first week, they still would have been navigating through initial shock and grief and likely wouldn't have participated. And their messages were so incredibly powerful for everybody in attendance. All three of the families that were represented just did a beautiful job. We had a phenomenal team that pulled together. I had very little to do with the creation and the organization of the vigil itself. It's actually individuals in our Dean of Students office that did a fantastic job. Our auxiliary services folks that put the facility together, our security folks that they had a security presence that didn't feel oppressive being in that space. It felt very family oriented there, and it was a secure experience for our families. And so it ended up turning out really well. And for me personally, it was a very healing experience to be at.
And do we have any more questions from the audience? No worries. If you think of something later, there is a lunch that Terry will talk about more after this, but feel free to get your questions answered there because we do want to make sure that we are giving answers to the best of our ability. And with that, Provost, the arrest of a suspect on December 30th brought forth a sense of relief for many throughout the community. Did the arrest bring about some sense of closure, or did it bring about more uncertainty?
I don't know that I would use the word closure because especially at that point, there was still so much, so many feelings and just the event was, closure is not the right word. It was a new chapter. And I can say that I think everyone in this community took a big breath and was able to think about kind of moving forward from that point. We also didn't have a lot of details at that moment, but as Blaine mentioned earlier, we had a lot of students that were on the fence about what they were going to do. We had a lot of parents who were on the fence about what they should do. And so once the suspect was apprehended and we started to get a little information about that, we felt like we could start to move forward and really look forward. We did have a little bit of the media circus for a few weeks at the beginning of the semester, But then they actually went away, and it actually felt like a normal semester in many ways. And frankly, we haven't had one of those in a long time, and that was a good thing. And so, yeah, closure I don't think is the right word, but we definitely entered a different chapter in this story.
I like that you pointed out closure is not the right word because it was in the question, but that's a good thing to point out. And with that being said, I think it's very evident today. Obviously, Trish had mentioned it's only been 6 months, so it's not like we are seeing a lot of long-term effects. I think grief and tragedy and loss it's an ongoing thing that someone is experiencing. There's no timeline to the point where it's just like it's over with. But I'm very thankful for the community that we have here at U of I, and I'm thankful that we're able to have this panel today in hopes that, God forbid, something were to happen like this to you guys, you would know how to respond on your universities or at your universities, on your campuses, how to support not just your student athletes, but your students in general as a whole being. And I hope that you've learned a little bit about today, something that you can take back to your campus before anything like this happens, if it were to. And with that being said, I would like to welcome back up Terry. Also, just let me reiterate, if you have questions that didn't get answered, you didn't think about them necessarily when I was asking for questions, we want to make sure that you're heard and that we are listening to you guys as well. So you can talk about that later with anyone from up here. We will be at the luncheon, but go ahead, Terry.
All right. Well, thank you so much. As you can see from our presenters here, dealt with a terrible situation with compassion and grace. I can't express that. Before we give them a round of applause, I also want to, as a good administrator, when you get a project like this, Janie and I talked about it, and the first thing you do is, who on my staff would really knock this out of the park? Chris Walsh, our athletic, stand up, Mr. Walsh. And also Sean. So these two gentlemen, I said, you guys, I need your help. I need you to put this together. And I really want to thank our panel. I know it is tough to get up there and talk about this, but I appreciate you guys so much for everything you did and are doing for our campus. So thank you so much. And before we give the last round of applause, housekeeping items. So lunch starts in 7 minutes. There's vans and golf carts out here, particularly for the group that has the 1:30 meeting, because the lunch is going to be in the top of the Kibbe Dome. So for those that are fast walkers, go ahead after we clap and stand up, go out the door, and we have people telling you where to go, because you're going to have lunch at 12:30, and then you got to be back in the I-sub for a 1:30 meeting with the NCAA president. So any questions on where you're going, what you're doing? Perfect. So one last round of applause for our whole entire group in campus. Thank you so much. Appreciate you. Appreciate that. Wow. Okay. Go Vandals.
And a great round of applause for Kaylani. She did a fantastic job as moderator.